Hello.
That's how you hypnotize them through the camera.
All right. Let me know when the YouTube's up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We
YouTube
are
up.
live. As
All
my
right.
phone has let you know.
All right. We're live. We're live. Thank you so much, you guys, for tuning in to this very special edition of Meme Knowledge. I am friend of the people, Robert Kelly, and then to my right here.
Prince Hayes, how y'all doing, man?
All right. And then in the studio,
D Johnson as always.
D Johnson is with us. So we've got a very special show planned, something very near and dear to our hearts. We're going to be talking about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King's birthday is today. Would have been 91 years old had he still been alive at this point. And we just want to talk about his legacy, who he was, and maybe put down some of the critiques that are um, floating around present day with him. We want to invite you guys first, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and so that way you can always take time out and see what we have to offer as far as the Soapbox Heroes. We do appreciate every single one of our viewers, and we do appreciate you guys as well. So, share, and subscribe for sure. And we're just gonna get started here. Okay, we won't waste any time. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to ask you, Prince,
Yes.
your to share your impressions, your initial impressions, or your story, your Martin Luther King story, and your journey in learning about him.
Okay, so I mean, I would say that my initial contact or first knowledge of Martin Luther King was where everybody else's was, elementary school age. Around that time, and I started to, get into the "I Have a Dream" speech and the Selma, the March on Selma, and things of that nature. Um, that was pretty much where it started. So it was pretty like vanilla, I would say. My view of Martin Luther King was very vanilla. I, turn the other cheek. He's a pacifist. Um, he got arrested a lot. Like, I'm just saying, like, these are the things that I knew about him early on. I would say probably for the first 15 years of my life, 16 years of my life, like that's what I knew or, whatever, learned about him. And then as I got older, when I really started studying about the civil rights movement and I started getting into like Stokely Carmichael and I mean, I was already into Malcolm. Malcolm was like my first like civil rights like hero. And I started getting into like James Baldwin and people like that. Um, Definitely James Baldwin.
Yeah.
But when I started getting, started seeing that and I started to learn a little bit more about him and my point of view of him changed. I started to see him more as like a radical. Like I never looked at him as radical, which is weird when you think about what he was doing at the time. It's like, what else could he have been but radical? You know what I'm saying? But for some reason, like I didn't view him as a radical up until that point. And then there was a point in time in my life when I started to look at him as being like soft and being weak, and I, like in my early 20s, I would say, and I was like, man, like Martin Luther, and I always liked him and thought he was dope, you know what I'm saying? But I was like, that couldn't have been me. Like I kind of took that approach, you know what I'm saying? Like I would have been doing something different than he was doing, or I would have been more more militant about it, but then it basically came full circle. And then when I got when like now, or even within the last like 10 years or so, I think Martin Luther King is like the greatest, dopest, like one of the greatest, dopest human beings to ever live. As far, I mean, when you're talking about fighting for causes that you believe in, like he is it. Like he's the pinnacle of it, as far as I'm concerned. And he was a genius. I mean, and I don't mean that that's not hyperbole. You know what I'm saying? I'm not calling him a genius like Kanye calls himself a genius, or like like a lot of people, contemporaries nowadays will call themselves geniuses. But I mean that in a literal sense, like he graduated from college when he got his master's when he was 19 years old. You know what I mean? Like he was smart. Like Martin Luther King was extremely intelligent. And then if you look at the way that he went about moving people, that in itself shows his genius. Like without the education, without the formal education part of it, just the high level of intelligence it took and fortitude it took to get people to basically move when he said move. And it wasn't like he was some general, like we're saying, like he was like I was saying, like he wasn't like uh um an intimidating person, right? In the physical sense, it wasn't like he was like a book. He wasn't like Suge Knight. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't militant. He wasn't like give me my gun. He wasn't, he wasn't like a Khalid Muhammad type individual. He was, he wasn't soft spoken either, at all, not at all.
Right.
But I'm just talking about his approach wasn't as such, and for him to be able to get people to buy into what he was, to the game plan, and he had the vision to execute, and he knew what to do, and he would go. I mean, like he would go out to the marches, and he would tell people, don't fight back. I don't care what the police do, you don't fight back. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't antagonize, you don't, like he, and people will listen. And that took a lot of courage, and that also took a lot of people being like people. I think seeing him at that time, I didn't see him, but I'm saying I would assume that if somebody tells you to do that, going against your natural instinct, right, and you still listen to them, that shows the type of command he had over people, and the influence he had over people. And he used it for good. He didn't use it to manipulate people, to do nefarious things. He used it so people could progress. You know what I'm saying? So for the betterment of all mankind, and specifically Black people in America. So I got a strong affinity for the man.
Right. Right. Okay. D.
Martin Luther King, I was very familiar with him at an early age because my mother was kind of part of that whole situation with the civil rights movement itself. Mm-hmm. So she always wanted me to have a very genuine, at least a genuine affection for him that I manufactured for myself. I listened to a lot of what he said. I mean, we were listening to the letter to Birmingham on the way over here. And some of the things that I remember her, teaching me at that age about just, standing up for yourself. And if the legacy that Martin Luther King gave me, or the personal take I took from him, a man of stoic courage, because it takes, like you said, it takes a lot to stand down in the face of violence. It's very easy to lash out and fight back. And I don't think that people really understood. I mean, to go to jail for something you believe in, not many people will do that. To go to jail twice, not many people are going to do that. And in the time that you're in jail, you're still thinking about the people. You know what I mean? To write the letters, to get the word out, to still motivate and inspire people that, hey, the movement is tough, but I'm here with you in this movement. I'm not shying away from it. I'm not backing down. I'm not delegating the responsibility of taking the time away from your family and sitting in jail. I'm the one doing it. Mm-hmm. And that was the kind of passion that, it made me proud to be a Black person when I was a younger man, because it was very hard to find things in the 80s and the 90s, or well, I'll just say the 80s. I mean, the 90s we started to see a renaissance, but in the 80s it was very hard to find things that were, how do you want to say it, that were culturally decent for Black people to be proud of. We had Michael Jackson. I mean, we had Thriller. We could dance. We could jump. We had, Magic Johnson. We could ball the hell out, but we didn't have anybody that was really somebody to look up to. You know what I mean? We didn't have
in the 90s.
No, in the 80s.
Oh, in the 80s.
70s, 80s was a dark. I'm not saying dark period, but it was a quieter time for Black people. It was a time where we lost a great leader, and we found we were set back by it. And I think it took a little while for Black people to get over that.
There was a vacuum. There was definitely a void, a void of power for a while. But I don't want to. I definitely there was a lot of people in the 80s and 90s that was solid. So I don't want to discount them. Like I said, brother Khalid Muhammad was dope. What's his name? I'm tripping. Black Panthers were around the 70s. Huey P. Newton. I know now. And the thing that I don't want to get caught up in is because I'm reading a lot of stuff. I'm reading people's comments right now, and we'll get to them, and we appreciate everybody commenting. But what I'm already seeing is a lot of people, and this is what we wanted to get into. A lot of people are already having this stance of like, he was soft, he was weak, he was a punk. Like I literally I read 3 comments, and I heard punk, soft. I've heard punk once and soft twice. And that's, I mean,
I'm gonna be
like you can't call Martin. You cannot call
right.
Martin Luther King a punk. That's
go
crazy.
A little bit, just to, not to go long-winded on what I was saying, but just to hit that straight on the face. Like, bro shed blood. Like,
yeah,
bro really marched for miles. Like,
he organized.
Bro really
organized.
Went into the belly of the beast. Like, if you don't know, we was gonna talk about this later, but we'll get right to it right now. If you haven't watched the video of, or have you ever watched the videos in the 60s of how the police actually handled a demonstration in America, you would think that was a foreign country.
Mm-hmm.
They drowned people in the streets. People see it and they be like, oh, they hit it with a water hose. It ain't that bad. I challenge anyone to stand in front of a fire hose. Anyone. And take that to the chest and say, it's all right, it's just water.
And pinned to a building or something.
Or have German shepherds sent into the crowd and just indiscriminately tearing at men and women and children. It doesn't matter. So to call somebody who stood in the midst, now if you wanted to say he was a punk because he wasn't there, I'd agree with you. If he was gathering the masses up and then said, hey, I'll meet you there, just go ahead and I'll meet you there, then we could talk about it. But we talk about somebody that was arm in arm with people walking down the same shit with Bernie Sanders that I always get upset about when people say Bernie Sanders ain't never did nothing. Same situation. He was there. They got the receipts. The man died for the cause. He took a freaking 223 through the chest. You gonna tell me he was a punk? That's like saying JFK was a punk. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
That's not,
nobody is perfect. So I don't like I got over using words like that unless a person actually, unless a person sold this out, then that's totally different. And if you feel like he sold this out, then that we can have that discussion too. That's what we're here for. We're here to talk. I mean, we're gonna talk about that. So whatever you want to talk about, leave it in the comments, and we'll definitely get to it.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely thank everybody for rocking with us. And again, if you're coming into YouTube right now, like, share, subscribe. And get the for the Soapbox Heroes Network. If you are on a Facebook Live, go ahead and follow me, follow Prince. That way you're not going to miss a show. We got a lot of great things coming this year, and we want to go ahead and compound on that. And when I think about Martin Luther King and my journey with him, of course, just like just about anyone else in America, it was something that we were taught about in elementary school. I grew up in the South, and I lived in Birmingham, and Martin Luther King was a big deal. There was a lot of people. It wasn't uncommon for you to have family members that had met or had a personal story with Martin Luther King, marched with Martin Luther King in Birmingham. It was not uncommon to meet people and things of that nature. We he was very revered. It was a very, very revered man. I think probably more in Alabama and Mississippi and things of that nature. I think he was even more revered than other parts of the country, Atlanta and things of that nature. So yeah. So as I grew up, we were with a deep respect for Martin Luther King, and we were told, of course, the speeches, like I hear, his birthday is holiday. We off school. I could hear the speeches going through his house. His house. They would play on the radio, or people would play on their record players and things of that nature. I do have memories of that. And then as I got older, I would just have that kind of reverence for Martin Luther King, but very little understanding of what he actually stood for. Very little understanding, very little perspective in history, because I think that the schools, just learning about him from an academic standpoint on the schools, can often leave you with that. But I think that that's what they want you to kind of take away from Martin Luther King, that he was just a guy. He had a dream. He was a great leader. He has a birthday. You know what I mean? There's a parade. You're supposed to like him. You're supposed to be cool, and can't nobody say nothing bad about him. As I began to get older and I studied Martin Luther King for myself, I studied him from first of all from a standpoint of what I would call bad faith standpoint. I was in a cult, you know, and in that cult, they teach you that Martin Luther King um, sold people out. Martin Luther King was that segregation was better for Black people. That Martin Luther King's fight was what kind of sold our people out, and the reason that we're in the condition that we're in today is partly because of people like Martin Luther King and their misuse of the Bible and religion. That was basically, and then that was also a reflection and an indictment on the Black Christian church as a whole. That's how I was looked at Martin Luther King. What I began to do, because I was never the type of person that wanted to just take someone's word for it, I began to read his speeches and I began to, study him more. And as I studied him in order to teach other people about Martin Luther King against Martin Luther King. And if I was to go down my Facebook post right now, down my Facebook timeline, you would see posts against Martin Luther King's stance with some of them with vitriol and hatred toward Martin Luther King. Um,
Which
things
isn't uncommon as well.
Absolutely not. It's not uncommon. But as I began to study him more, I studied him to actually refute him. But and there are critiques, you know what I mean, that I do have of Martin Luther King. Nobody's perfect.
Absolutely.
There's absolute critiques I have of him, of course. But what I began to learn when I began to learn about the man Martin Luther King, um, he changed my mind about him through my study of him.
Right.
And my focus of his study wasn't necessarily of what other people had to say about him, but more about what he said and what he represented and what he actually did. And from a biographical standpoint, you know what I mean? And when I understand the condition of today and what's going on in the world today, um, just it magnifies the impact of a loss of a man like that in his prime, and what the work that he still had to do, the work he still had left inside of him. He was very important, and we have not seen a Martin Luther King. And at this day, our people, Black people especially, but when I say Black, when I say people, I say Americans, we need a Martin Luther King. We need someone that not only understands the ins and outs and the diagnosis of the problems in America, but also has the fire, the attitude, the plan to actually get things done. The patience, right? The lessons, the teaching. Imagine the people that Martin Luther King, had he lived another 30 or 40 years, the people that he could have mentored, the places that he could, the things that he could have seen and done. You know what I mean? What could Martin Luther King have done with an internet age, with a microphone and an ability to speak to millions of people at the same time, like we have,
even just to have the ear of a
with a television show?
Yeah, I don't like so I want to say that America now, right now, if Martin Luther King came with the same I guess message, which was one like his definitely like his economic message.
Mhm.
I think if he came now with that message, I think most Black people would reject him.
Absolutely, because they reject it's a populist message.
Yeah, and it's anti-capitalism. And
Right.
most Black people not most Black people, most people in America
Mhm.
specifically only understand capitalism. They've never heard the other side of the story. So
well, they have, and the bad part about it is that every time that they've heard the other side of the story, it's a negative. It's looked at as like socialism and communism are completely two structures or two constructs that are confused, but that's not because they're confused because they're not taught. It's confused because it's intentional.
Well, it's a combination. I think it's not only not taught, but what is taught about it is false.
Right.
So that's the same thing as not teaching it.
So it's like
it's a perversion.
You can't learn how to even have a second opinion or have a split opinion on it because capitalism is what you drummed on us. But again, that is why you're right about that. I mean, 40 years removed, you think about somebody just coming up and saying, "Hey, we're not gonna go and shop at Amazon if you're Black for a day." For what? I gotta buy my cat food. I got to get
I think
X, Y, Z.
we could be mobilized today easier than we were back then because
Mhm.
of the internet. I don't think that would be the issue. I think that the issue would be I think that you have to understand that it's like now, like so when the civil rights era was popping off, capitalism hadn't been around that long. Like you know what I mean? It was bad. I mean it was bad. It had been around at that point for like 70 years in America, I would say. So somewhere like what was like late 1800s, when capitalism like really took
Where you get
over.
the
When
robber
Industrial
barons,
Revolution
Yeah,
started
the
tapping
era of
in.
the robber barons, and
the
then
industrial age. So when the
industrial
industrial
age,
age
right?
hit, right? So and then you had the Great Depression, and so a lot of people were alive in the 60s. Most people, that experience that went through the Great Depression, they were alive in the 60s. They were alive in the 50s. So they had a different. I think you could have got them, when you start talking that money stuff. At that point, it was like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. Like this system isn't the best because they had just experienced that the system wasn't the best. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? But now I feel
And they
like,
understood what got them out of it too.
and they knew what got them out
Well,
of
what
it.
got him out of it was World War II.
No,
No. What got them out of it was
social
yeah,
programs
social
like
programs.
Medicaid,
Well, the New
Medicare,
Deal came into
Social
play.
Security.
I
Those
do
are the
know
things
that,
that got them out. The New
but
Deal.
the economy of the United States, it didn't rebound until
The war made them more poor.
Right.
Like the war takes away money from
The New Deal. The New Deal happened during the war.
Yeah.
See, the war, they were just both happening. Now the New Deal was happening during the war, and the New Deal is what drove, especially when you're talking about elderly people and the poorest of people, out of poverty. The war is
Well, the war just
wars cost money.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And they tax it, and they did tax people exponentially. And I'm guessing when I'm talking about the war causing a rebound, it gave Black people work for one. And that was kind of where the Civil War movement even took an even bigger face, was because even though there were Black men that were dying, or Asian men that were dying over, in Europe and in the Philippines, they were still coming home and treated like second-rate citizens. They were treated like second-rate citizens across the water, and their pay was different. So economic justice was something that became a forefront. Because if you could die for a country and you can't get paid the same amount of money as the one got to die next to you, it's just that's injustice.
Yeah. It definitely now fast forward to now, it's just like a lot of generations of people that they have become dependent on the system, and they think that like emotionally attached to it as well, and because that's all they know, and yeah, times are hard, but they haven't hit rock bottom like we hit during the recession, and they haven't hit rock bottom like how we were during the war. So it's harder, because they feel like they have something to lose when it's they don't. You really don't have anything to lose. It's just going to take a person. So I'm just saying like if you just took MLK Jr. or almost any civil rights leader from their era and just dropped them into now. You know what I'm saying? Like, how effective would they be? And I think Martin Luther King would be one of the least effective ones.
Yeah, I think mostly like Baldwin comes to mind.
I think Baldwin would be very, very, very powerful.
Just because his bona fides in the intellectual community. Yeah, I think he was always embraced by white people. Baldwin.
Yeah.
They love to hear him talk. He was just so eloquent. James Baldwin, that's right.
He was actually watching one of my documentaries about World War II, and James Baldwin was actually going to enlist. And quick story. So he went in, signed up, got to the recruiting officer, and the recruiting officer said, "Hey, so what do you want to do?" He said, "I want to work. I want to go to the war. I want to work in the offices." And he was like, "Hey, you're smart, you're educated, you got everything but the color." And he walked straight out of the enlistment office that day and never went back. And he swore to himself and he made a promise that if the country did not see him as fit enough to work for them because of the color of his skin, he did not feel fit enough to die.
Absolutely, and he was an expatriate for a while from the United States.
Exactly. They say he became one of the greatest civil rights movements, or one of the greatest civil rights.
He's a writer. He was a great writer.
Yeah, just so you guys know, anybody that's listening, understand. Hit the like, share, subscribe. Make sure that you're, taking part of this because we do have
We
much more to
appreciate
come
you
for this.
being
We
with us.
do definitely appreciate you guys. You guys are the things to make this run. Now, anybody that's wants to comment, what is your personal Martin Luther King story? Is there anything in particular that you guys want to hear about? Go ahead and leave it in the comments, and we're going to start addressing some of those as we go through the different facets of his legacy.
I'm gonna read some comments right now because I'm having a very interesting conversation with Asia. Shout out to Asia. She has been raising some really good points, so I totally understand where she's coming from. So she said Martin Luther King was a punk a lot of the time. He would not go out on the road with these men and women. And I'm just going to fast forward. I'm just going to set it up with that one to show you. So that's where she started at. And then she said, and then she brought up the busing situation. And I think it was in Selma. Hold on, I'm going to try to find her exact comment. She said, yes, at times, in particular, the bus rides, he literally told college kids, no, he told college kids no, he was not going to ride with them. They felt completely deflated in their attempt to fight for justice, and so I'm aware of that. I don't, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are aware of things like we were saying before. Martin Luther King wasn't perfect. like nobody like just for an example, and I don't want to, because we talked about this before, and I really don't want to do this, but I have to do it because she actually mentioned the person. So she said, Asia says, she shouted out Malcolm. She's like, yes, Malcolm, right? Okay. So I love Malcolm too. Malcolm is like my guy. You know what I mean? Like I love Malcolm. But Malcolm X was a religious zealot. Like he would say stuff like the world, like God's gonna come. Like he would say like stuff now that if he said like if he was alive today and he started talking that stuff, most of us would be like, what? Like, what are you talking about? God, what?
I didn't say he might be borderline terrorist if you
not
like
terrorist. Just borderline on some like crazy.
Just a religious fanatic.
Yeah, it's like a religious fanatic. Like he was a straight up religious fanatic, and that in like nowadays that would be weird. Back then, I'm sure it was different because I feel like all I don't know of any civil rights leader that I know of that was atheist. That was like outwardly atheist. Like they all like even James Baldwin. I never heard him talk about Jesus or anything, but he would talk about God. You know what I mean? Like, and I like so. And I think the majority of us either. I don't know. I don't think we're that religious, especially like our age group and younger. We're not that religious. So, you get a person like Malcolm X talking about God is going to come. Like if you listen to his speech at Berkeley when he ended up talking to the crowd and stuff, and he was saying that to the crowd. He was like, yeah, God's going to come back and the wrath is going to be. And I was like, yeah, that's weird. You know what I'm saying? Like, and Malcolm was dope. I love Malcolm. He was dope.
And what people don't realize is that the message that Malcolm was preaching from a spiritual standpoint is still around today. Yep. It's much like the Farrakhan message, the Nation of Islam message that from Muhammad, from Dr.
It's literally
right.
The same
and so it's the same message. So if you're not down with that, then I mean, like you should at least look into that if that's if you want to kind of understand what Malcolm X. And then when we're talking about these men, let's not leave out the result element of it all. You know what I mean? The results matter as well. What did Malcolm do? What were the results of Malcolm's thought? What was the result of his actions? What was the result? And I mean, his story is compelling and his words are compelling. And he had a wonderful take on race. But what were the results that we live with today? And what were the results of what Martin Luther King did? And they don't make monuments to punks. They don't.
Here's one of the things that I will say. I feel like a lot of we talked about that. I mean, I'm probably gonna double down on what you just said.
Real quick, Juan asked. I just want to say this real quick. He said, Juan said, I thought you asked why are y'all niggas in here talking about this? I didn't see. I'm reading and talking at the same time. I'm doing like two, three different. I got a sheet right here, and I'm reading your shit, and I'm talking and listening at the same time. So my brain ain't all there, and I'm not the best at multitasking. I'm sorry.
So, what I was gonna say is, when it comes to civil rights leaders, it doesn't really matter what name you put on it. I've always said
James Baldwin was gay. Who cares?
Right.
Right.
Everybody got something about him that somebody gonna be like they weird. They was
put it like this. I put it into a sports analogy because for me, life is very easy when I put things into sports analogies. You don't love your team for the name on the back of the jersey. You love your team for the name on the front. You love the team. You don't love the player.
Yeah.
So Martin Luther King, Malcolm X,
they was on the same team. Yeah.
It doesn't matter who they were. Their mission was the same.
Yeah.
And the effectiveness of their mission at that particular point in time was high. They were able to mobilize people. Sure, there were some people along the way that may have felt let down, discouraged, even at times upset with the leaders. But at the end of the day, they were still a part of the movement because of the leaders. They were brought in for that. They may have, and even if they denounced the leader themselves, I'm pretty sure they didn't say, well, fuck what they're standing for, because they knew that at the end of the day, that's what they were enlightened. That's what they were giving that person the opportunity to meet for in the first place, was to gain the knowledge of why they should fight.
And I also want to say this too, because we're gonna talk about this. I think we should probably just do this right now.
Yeah, it's a good segue.
Yeah. So the reason why me personally, like now, in my understanding, the reason why I love Martin's message the most is because his economic message is exactly what we need.
Absolutely.
It's exactly what we need to hear. And I've heard this critique of him a lot, and it was actually in these mentions. It wasn't even in these mentions. It was like, people are saying like he was. I've heard this. I heard he was funded by the Rothschilds. I've heard he was handpicked by the government. Like all these things, which here's what I'm saying. That could be true. The Rothschild part, I don't care about that. But the handpicked by the government could be true because he didn't have any control over that. They didn't make him who he was. He was who he was before, right? They could have saw what was going on, because there was a lot of people moving. There was a lot of moving parts at that time, and been like, out of these motherfuckers that's out here doing this, he's the one, seems like the one we could work with the most. And then that's who they went at. And that's fine. That's not his fault. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't blame him for that. I think that like
you need an element of that to work in a political movement.
You do. You need people. You need to work, quote unquote, work across the aisle. You know what I'm saying? Like you have, like, there is no way around it unless you're talking about literally taking up arms and killing people and having a physical bloody revolution. You know what I'm saying? But Martin was trying to have a revolution of the mind first, and then, you know what I'm saying, and then it would and then have people mobilize, and you know what I'm saying, and go in that way, right? And that's the physical part. You don't. There have been bloodless coups that get executed. It was just a coup in
Bolivia.
In Bolivia, bloodless. Nobody died.
Right.
Nobody got murdered. Not every great change needs
violence to precipitate.
Needs violence for it to happen. You know what I'm saying? And there was violence that happened during the civil rights movement. It just happened to one group more than another. Right. You know what I'm saying? It very rarely happened
perpetrated, especially by
the oppressor, right? And not the oppressed, right? Like, we didn't fight back physically so much, right? But I feel like his economic message is exactly what we need today. It was what we needed 70 years ago. It is what it is. I mean, and his economic message was one of social economics. It was social democracy.
Right.
That was his. So that's why, me personally, that's why I connect with his message more than anybody else. And even with saying that, though, even Malcolm was a socialist. They all had elements of like the majority of them had elements of socialism. Some of them was on that, like, you got to pull yourself up. You know, you had your W.B. Du Bois, and you had your
Carver.
You had your Carvers. Yeah, you had your Washington Carvers. Yeah. That was like, oh, you get out here, you can make this money.
Your Thomas Sowells.
Yeah, you got those type of people, right?
And what's the man today? The older guy. No. This dude, you know what I'm talking about, though. He was just on the Breakfast Club. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson.
You got the Claude Andersons out here, and I'm not. Hey man, more power to you. Okay, I don't identify with their messages. Like those types of people don't call to me. You know what I'm saying? Even though, like, and here's why it was so here's why we need different leaders, because if we had one leader, not all of us would follow because their messages wouldn't align with what we believe.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like Malcolm's message I align with what he was talking about. I align with what Martin was talking about. I align with what Huey was talking about, what Stokely was talking about. Like, I align with those people. I didn't align with W.B. Du Bois. I didn't align with Washington Carver. I don't align with Claude Anderson. I don't. Like, I listen to them. I think they're really intelligent. I appreciate what they're doing, but I don't identify with that. And I don't like how they, and in all honesty, take it a step further, I don't like how they talk. Like they're you know what I mean? Like, it's very judgmental, and it's very, like, I just don't. That's how I feel. I'm saying when they talk to when they talk, and I don't even feel like they're talking to me.
Right.
When they're
Like
judging.
they're talking at you.
Yeah, I feel like they're talking at me, but I also feel like they're not even talking about me, right? Like it's not like they'll be like, black people, we ain't got nothing, and I'm just like, damn, like
what do you
like, what the fuck?
Well, but they always seem to have a lot.
But they got a lot though. They got a lot of stuff, and it just so, and that's what I'm saying. I'm
well, and let's go ahead and let's go ahead.
Said on Andrew, shout out, thank you for tuning in on YouTube.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Bernie, he said Bernie is more important than MLK right now.
Okay.
Booker T. That was the other one. I think. Thank you so much, Adrian. That was the other cat that we forgot to mention. Booker T. I didn't align with Booker T.
Right.
I read a lot of Booker T. Watched this stuff growing up, and I was like,
He says that Bernie's more important. Well, Bernie's running for president, and Martin Luther King is not alive. But when we're talking about, it depends on how you measure importance.
Right.
When you're talking about someone being important, what does that mean? So he's going to have to expound on that a little bit for us to understand his comment a little better. What does he mean by that?
What you trying to say?
what did he say? Bernie's more important.
He said Bernie is more important than MLK right now. If I'm trying to read between the lines of what you're saying, I'm making my own assumption on it because I don't know if you're still there with us. I hope so, because I'd like you to clarify yourself. But as far as importance, because he's keeping kind of the same message going economically, yes, he's probably more important than MLK right now because he's alive.
Right.
But beyond that, he's not saying anything different in the last 40 years that he didn't partner with MLK.
Well, let's do this. Because we're going to be talking about this anyway. Let's talk about Martin's economic legacy a little bit deeper, and Andrew, maybe if you have any questions or concerns, because I will tell you, yes, Martin's message was one of social democracy. Very similar to what Bernie Sanders is saying, but Bernie Sanders got his message from Martin Luther King.
I don't think Bernie would be here without Martin.
And so what? Right. So as far as importance, again, it would just depend on what you would consider important.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about the economic temperature of Martin's day, because when you understand that, what happens is you begin to understand exactly where his views come from. Okay. And one of those things was in the emergence of crony capitalism on a much larger scale, where you had people trying to undo some of the things that were advanced during the FDR did during the New Deal. It's almost like a strike back for the bourgeoisie. You saw great gaps in income disparity between everyone, but especially in the Black community. The Black community was terribly victimized at that point in time, from capitalism. Because the whole thing was
market,
right.
It was in, any market.
What was happening was the government was still stepping in to help certain groups of people to prosper, giving land grants and things of that nature still, homestead under the Homestead Act and things of that nature. But these things were not available to Black people. Segregation, as lovely as some of you guys think it was, segregation was not good for Black people. It actually destroyed not only their economic opportunity, but it also destroyed self-esteem. And so basically,
when we talk about
so Bernie's going to continue white supremacy. I don't even know what.
But when we talk about segregation, because it's actually still practiced in some parts of Mississippi.
No, we can talk about that. We can definitely talk about that. Just make sure you, because you got my number. Because I really want to actually talk to you about that person, one-on-one. We can talk about that, about Bernie and white supremacy. That's like a whole other show.
Anybody that I very rarely hear people say that they found segregation to be a good practice.
No, actually, there's no shortage. I can go and post segregation was a good thing, and I'll get about 100 likes on my particular Facebook. Because a lot of people did believe that segregation was, if we could just go back to segregation, that for somehow when black people and white people were in the same space, that it gave white people an opportunity to dominate black people, and that things like Black Wall Street and stuff like that.
So
were like, but what they don't understand, or they fail to understand, is that Black Wall Street, maybe there was maybe one other place like it at those times, but the vast majority of black people were very poor, and the black people that did have wealth, it's a lot like black wealth today. It's consolidated at the top.
Yeah.
And when we say, well, we have $1 trillion worth of spending power, you got to understand, you're talking about the top 10% of black people.
990 million of that is dispersed between 1%.
Well, no. When they say, okay, so real quick, and you're right. I mean, I want to say two things. So first of all, I want to address my man down there. What's up, brother? He said segregation got us where we at now. Okay, so segregation or desegregation, you should say, right? Desegregation got us where we're at now, right? If that, I'm guessing that's what you really mean. So here's the question that I pose to anybody that thinks we should go back to being segregated. What is easier to do? Is it easier to go backwards
or to progress,
or is it easier to push forward? Because I agree that right now we're in limbo, and we've been stuck in limbo since the Civil Rights Act. I agree with that. I do think that we haven't. I don't think that we've gone forward enough, and I also don't see like why we would go back. But I'm asking anybody that thinks that we should go backwards or go back to segregation. Do you think it would be easier to go back to segregation? Because think about what that would take. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think, like, because as much as you may think that your life is disconnected from white America, it's not.
Let me double down
on this way too. And then moving forward, do you think? I just thought I had another thought. I'm sorry, I got to interrupt my own thought with this one. So, what do you want out of life? Like, what do you want? What do you think it would take for you to be happy, for you to live a fulfilling life? Right now, you ask us. I'm sure we all pretty much share the same views. You give us a place to live, a safe place to live and raise our babies, right? You give us food to eat, clean food to eat, clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, good paying jobs, healthcare, access to education, higher education. I don't want the threat of war to my kid, or or anything. So I think we all have like a general view of like of what would make our lives better, right? And these are things that I think most people would agree on. Everybody watching and everybody here, we would agree on that. Okay, cool. So do you think it's easier to fight? Because you would have to fight for segregation at this point. You see what I'm saying? It wouldn't just be like white people would be like, cool, segregate. Like,
black people wouldn't just be like,
black people wouldn't be like that either. So you would have to fight for segregation. And then once you segregate, you got to fight for it. Then the work literally has just started, because now you got to start all over again. You got to come anew. The government has to be anew. You got to build new jobs. You got to build an infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So do you think it's easier to do that, or do you think it's easier to move forward? And moving forward is getting those things that I was just describing for every, whether it be black people or white people or whatever, I don't care. Like we deserve reparations, right? I
believe that
most black people can agree with that. We deserve reparations, right? And then when I speak of reparations, I ain't talking about that shit Marianne Williamson was talking about.
I'm not talking about that shit.
I'm talking about trillions of dollars. Like, we deserve money. We deserve bread, straight up, cut the check. I'm on that, right? But setting that aside, before if we get the money, let's get the money, right? But in the meantime, we can get education, we can get clean water, we can get clean, you know what I mean? Like these are things that we could get, I think, in our lifetimes fairly easily if we came together. I think we can get reparations too. You know what I'm saying? But I think that fight would be exponentially harder, and I'm up for the fight. Like, let's do it.
Because of the stigmatization.
Because of the stigmatization, exactly. But because what do we be up against? But also because it's not a universal program. Universal programs are easier to get past. but universal programs also would greatly benefit us more than it would benefit any other group.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so if we could end something like racial environmental racism, right? Environmental racism affects us more than it affects any other group of people other than Native Americans in America right now, right? So if we can end environmental racism, yeah, it affects white people, yeah.
And let's keep it real about segregation. When segregation was happening, it was black people were denied opportunities that white people had, choice opportunities. They still had to participate in America at the same level, as meaning you still had the white guy across town might have had a better job. You still had to pay the same kind of taxes he paid.
Yeah.
For instance, you still had the same burdens, but your taxes did not afford you the same opportunity that his taxes afforded him. And when people are talking about going back to segregation, they'll understand that separate. And this is from Thurgood Marshall, a great man, right? A great man, one of the greatest civil rights leaders from the judges bench. Thurgood Marshall. Separate is inherently unequal. Yeah. And whenever there was their opportunity for someone to get the short end of the stick, it would always end up being black people. And when we're talking about segregating, you're actually giving the people that make the rules, which would be the majority, which would be white people at this point in time, just like it was back then, you're giving them the opportunity to mistreat you.
Yeah.
Legally, you're giving them the legal opportunity to mistreat you.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful when you're talking about going back or participating, or that black people had it better during segregation. See, that the thing is that these leaders that were speaking out against segregation, they rose up in segregation, and their message came out of the living through segregation. Yeah. The segregation that you just talk about, but you've never been a part of. Yeah. And you're calling it great, but these great men are telling you it's not what you thought it was, because they lived it.
Yeah, here's what I always say about segregation, as far as if you think we're talking about economics at the end of the day. That was the whole point. We got to start on this.
Wait, Donnell, this is easy. He said that's why you make your own rules. You cannot make your own rules in America. There's a sovereignty of the nation of America. There's a sovereignty. The U.S. government actually owns America, meaning you can go buy a house, and if they felt like they want to make a public park out of your house, they could offer you the money. You had to take it. They own this place, and they're sovereign over it. When you say make your own rules, that's not making your own laws. You cannot do that.
Yeah, and also that, once again, that goes back to what I was just asking.